Hi, everybody. How's it going? Good morning.
Good morning.
I am so excited to be here. So for those of you that may not be able to see me, I am Tammara. I'm a female. My pronouns are she, her. I've got dorky glasses and bright red hair. That might be enough for you to paint a picture. I have been working in project management now for over 2 decades. And honestly, I love it. Project management is so great. And I started out, initially, I worked on my Lean Six Sigma black belt. And then I became a PMP just 2 years ago. And I'm super excited to be here with you and talk about conflict resolution strategies for project management. Now, it is a buffet, so take what works for you and leave what doesn't appeal to you. Now, I first started learning about conflict resolution back in 2004 when I worked for AT&T Wireless, and I learned most of it on the job. But I've been dealing with conflict since I've been a toddler. Yes, crying and throwing up on your mom is one way to resolve conflict. That does not work well in project management, though. We've got 2 learning objectives for this class. One, we would like you to gain an understanding of fundamental methods to manage and resolve conflict. And 2, identify ways to resolve conflict and achieve aligned goals by applying the ideas shared today. This course is worth 1 CPE. In order to get full credit, I ask that you please respond to all 3 polls that will pop up as knowledge checks throughout the presentation. You will also see the information on the slides. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will go over all questions at the very end. Some of the topics we're going to go over today include the definitions and types of conflict, the benefits and modes, some methods and tools that you can put to use right away. We'll talk about doing a stakeholder analysis. We will discuss empathy and how to persuade other people. And we'll go over this negotiation idea called expanding the pie. And then we'll get into a couple of example scenarios, and I'll leave you with some common pitfalls to avoid as well as some key takeaways. And there will be 3 check your knowledge questions to coincide with those polls. So what is conflict? Conflict is any kind of disagreement that you have with another person or group. And as we can see in the state of the news, there are countries that have been at war for decades because they haven't been able to master conflict resolution. Now, clearly, they haven't taken my class. If anybody can give the Middle East my phone number, I'd appreciate that. But conflict is natural. When you're dealing with humans, it's inevitable. Here's the official definition. It's a disagreement, discord, or clash of interests. So I want to ask you, how old were you when you had your first conflict? And if you remember what it was, tell me in the chat. Was it fighting over your favorite stuffed animal with your sibling? Was it arguing with your parents when you didn't want to go to bed, but they told you you have to because you have school in the morning? I think for me, it was fighting with my brother over my favorite Ninja Turtle, which is Raphael, to be clear. Now, there are 5 main types of conflict, although there might be some other ones that can come up depending on how you define things, but they include task-related. These would be disagreements over project goals or methodologies, opinions on how to execute or what approach to take for the project. Interpersonal, which is like a personality clash. It could be a communication breakdown or even a perceived offense. Interest-based, sometimes we compete for interests, priorities, or agendas. When our objectives diverge, that can lead to disagreements. And roles and responsibilities. Confusion or ambiguity regarding your roles or responsibilities, or even decision-making authority on the team can lead to conflict. And one we're all familiar with, competing over resources. A lot of times in project management, we're dealing with limited money, labor, supplies, even access to facilities can be a competition over resource. So by recognizing conflicts early and implementing structured resolution processes, project managers and business leaders can prevent issues from escalating and disrupting the project progress, as well as the overall organizational mission. Now, when it comes to conflict, we have 2 main options, right? Deal with it, which I would recommend that you do directly and gently and as quickly as possible. Or you can make like Elsa and just let it go. And I won't sing to you because my voice isn't that great, but I'm sure you've got the tune in your head right now. Now, we're not that good at letting go completely, are we? Sometimes we move on, we try to forgive and forget, but we hold on to residual feelings or thoughts. Unresolved conflict can build up and mutate into something much worse if it's not resolved. It can hurt the team, the mission, and the project outcome. Well, there is a third choice, I guess, right? You can always just let it make us go bananas. Literally, we can just quit project management, run away to Panama, become a banana farmer. But you'll always have customers to deal with, right? As long as you're dealing with human beings, you are pretty much going to be faced with conflict at some point. So, what is conflict resolution? That is a process. It's a process, just like anything else, for addressing disputes or disagreements. It involves communication, negotiation, and problem solving. It might contain mediation or arbitration, depending on the level of conflict and the needs of the organization. And your underlying goals with conflict resolution are to promote peace and harmony, reduce the negative effects of conflict, achieve understanding and cooperation, and find mutually agreeable solutions that last. And that last part is important because we want to come up with a permanent solution, not a temporary one. It may not be a one and done, though, so you need to keep that in mind. Depending on how many issues and how deep the conflict goes, you might have to do multiple iterations in order to resolve everything. But that's okay. As long as you keep working at it and keep communicating, you will get through it. There's a lot of noticeable benefits to resolving conflict on the project. Better performance and productivity for your team members. You can improve employee morale, which reduces your turnover. You can strengthen relationships in the industry with your clients, amongst your teams, and you can strengthen your reputation as a company and as a project manager. Overall, it reduces risk and it promotes innovation. The conflict resolution is like a buy one, get one free, guys. Resolve the conflicts now, you'll probably have less HR complaints later. Because ideally, we just want everybody to get along and do their jobs, right? And of course, if you're a business, it will help increase your profitability as well. Because when people get along, they're happy, they buy. So there's something that's called the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, known as the TKI for short. If you've ever heard of the TKI, I'm curious, let me know in the chat. The TKI is a tool designed to identify your preferred approaches to handling conflict. So kind of like what you default to. It identifies 5 modes or styles. Each of them have their own pros and cons. You got competing. People in compete mode reflect a high level of assertiveness, but a low level of cooperation. They tend to pursue their own goals and their own things, regardless of what other people are doing. Avoiding. Avoidance represents a low level of assertiveness and cooperation. Those folks tend to evade or postpone conflicts, hoping that they resolve themselves. Accommodating. Accommodators are characterized by a high level of cooperation and a low level of assertiveness. They might prioritize maintaining harmony and preserving relationships over their personal goals. They might concede to others easily or maybe even be a doormat. Compromising. Compromising involves a moderate level of assertiveness and cooperation. People who adopt this approach strive to find middle ground or some way to split the difference. And then you've got collaborating. Collaborating is the mode where you have both high assertiveness and high cooperation. Individuals who favor this mode actively seek win-win solutions. They consider everybody's needs and perspectives, and they find something that everybody can have something from. Now, there is a model that I like to use. It's called the ABC model. It's the conflict triangle developed first by Professor Johann Galtung to provide a basis to analyze even the most complex conflict. And it starts with attitude. Attitude is something that we all have, and it is influenced by our background, our values, our culture, our beliefs. We have different values and beliefs, and if they're not in line with the project objectives or the approach, it can lead to conflict. So, in order to overcome that, we want to make sure that we're as inclusive as we can be and we foster cultural sensitivity to people that are different because attitude affects your behavior and your attitude affects my behavior too. So, we want to make sure that we're always putting on a positive and professional attitude despite our background. Then we've got the B, behavior. Conflicts often arise from poor communication, misunderstandings, or conflicting action. This is influenced by just our attitudes or even our feelings that day. So, behavior is something that can lead to conflict if the behaviors are not in line with expectations. And then we've got the C, context. So, context includes the structural or systemic issues or factors that are coming in from either resource constraints or the environment or the organizational structure. A lot of these things can work together in kind of a tandem to create conflict. So it's a good idea to analyze systemic issues and implement strategies so that you can promote alignment with your attitudes, behaviors, and context to go along with the client's expectations and the project mission. Now, I love Socrates. Way back from 350 BC, this guy came up with a great model for how to persuade people, how to argue and debate. And this was documented in the dialogues of Plato. And the number one thing with the Socratic method, when you're looking to resolve conflict, you want to lead with curiosity and not judgment. There are some questions that you can get into to dig down to the root of things. And those are like, why do you say that? What do you mean by that? This is going to help you understand their definitions, their expectations, their perspective. How does this relate to this? What do you think the main issue is? Could you expand on that further? What people, processes, or outcomes are affected by this situation? What outcomes would you like to see? You want to just keep asking why and keep asking good questions until you can get all the way to the root of the issue. Because sometimes with conflict, you'll find that what's actually going on is totally different than what you see on the surface. And that includes people's wants, needs, and expectations. And this brings us to our first knowledge check. So you should see a poll in Zoom. And the question is, which of the below is not a conflict style? Is it avoiding, accommodating, interpersonal, or compromising? Looks like pretty much everybody got the right one. It is interpersonal. We'll give it another 20 seconds here to give everybody a chance. Yep, looks like everybody got it. All right, good job, everybody. When it comes to resolving conflict, you got to be diplomatic. This means you got to keep the peace. You got to learn how to diffuse tension among parties. You got to keep your cool even when other people don't, and that can be challenging. You also want to keep communication flowing, right? A diplomat is someone who kind of acts as a go-between between departments, people, countries even. You want to be patient and persistent in the pursuit of long-term goals because meaningful progress requires time and effort. One of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King Jr. is build a bridge, not a wall. You know, when you're dealing with conflict, try to build a bridge to that other person so that maybe you guys can meet in the middle or they can come to your side or vice versa. If you build a wall, you're going to have to blow it up at some point, right? If you truly want to get through that conflict. So it's better to not build a wall to begin with. Now, you want to create a culture where all kinds of diversity is welcomed and respected and value the contributions of everyone. You want to actively encourage people to share their thoughts, their perspectives, and their ideas when it makes sense, obviously. There might be a time and place where it doesn't make sense because sometimes emergencies happen. But for the most part, I think we can all agree that diversity is great, even when it's diversity of thought. And you want to challenge your biases and assumptions. We all have them. And it's a good idea to reflect on them notice them when they're there, and make sure to challenge them. You also want to be open to changing your perspective when new information comes in or another teammate provides insight that you weren't aware of. I'm going to challenge you guys, don't take it personal. Do not take things personal, even if it is. And I know that can be hard, but you have to be able to separate the problem from the individual in order to solve the conflict. You want to avoid personal attacks or criticism. Don't play the blame game because it never goes anywhere good. You want to encourage empathy, respect, and understanding towards your colleagues, even during conflict. And you want to make sure that that's the culture on your team. Now, I would like to think that we all grow up, but we don't. The bullies we had in elementary school, a lot of them grew out of it, but some of them did not. And we're out here dealing with them in the workplace sometimes. There will always be bullies. There will always be negative Nancys, annoying Allens, no offense, Alan, and complaining Charlies. But you cannot let them deter you from your goals, priorities, or believing in yourself or your team or your mission. Now, one phrase that has helped me tremendously over the years, and I'm not even sure where I first learned it, but when somebody is in a disagreement with you and you need to kind of shut things down, thank you for your feedback. I'll take it into consideration. That right there is enough to typically disarm people because one, you're not arguing. You are acknowledging that they gave you information. Didn't shut them down, but in a way you are shutting them down because what else is there to say? Sure, they might come back to you later and ask, did you really consider what I gave you? And that's going to be up to you whether you share that information or not. But if you at least tell them that, a lot of times that'll be enough to stop any further arguing. So you got to make sure you set your emotions to the side, choose not to be offended. And I do think it is a choice because the way people act is often a reflection of them and not you. We react as we feel, as we see things. And so when somebody comes at you sideways, just know that person is probably having a bad day. There's something else going on, and it's probably not really about you and this interaction. Now, I love this notion from Patrick Bet-David. He's a YouTuber and business guru. Be hard on the problem and soft on the person. If we can get on the same side and we can say it's us versus the problem, then that right there, that's half your battle. We are now on the same side and we're focusing on the problem. That's a good way to shift from conflict to solution. Of course, you want to conduct rigorous and objective analysis of the problem together, including root causes and potential solutions. You want to emphasize the importance of critical and creative thinking. And then you want to find some common ground. Once you're on the same side, build that trust and rapport through honest and open communication. Find out what you can agree on, specifically things that are factual. You can also write down assumptions. Focus on your mutual benefits. Emphasize the potential advantages everyone will gain by solving the problem. Create common goals. Explore areas where the goals or objectives of the different parties align. Highlight common objectives to create a sense of unity and shared purpose. And then search for overlapping solutions. Brainstorm together potential solutions that address everyone's needs. Look for opportunities to integrate different perspectives and find mutually acceptable outcomes. And if you have to, seek mediation or facilitation. Sometimes a neutral third party can come in there and facilitate things to clarify interests and identify areas of agreement because you guys are too close to the problem. And you always want to ask, what if you don't resolve this? You want to set up a sense of urgency where it exists. If you don't solve this, what's going to happen? What's going to be lost or prevented or hurt by this conflict? And so being able to look out into the future and see that possible train wreck of where this could go if we don't fix it might help put a firearm under people to actually address the issue. Let me know in the chat if you're familiar with the fishbone diagram, Ishikawa. It is a project management tool that I love to use for a variety of different things. And it looks like this. So let's say my team is having a conflict over roles and responsibilities. So I would fill something out like this, and I just came up with these labels. You might think of other labels that would make sense to put here as well. And I would go through and document, what do I know? Who's involved? What are the interests and needs for those people? What are the perceptions or attitudes? What are behaviors and actions that I'm seeing surrounding this conflict? What are some organizational factors? And even what are some external influences? So the problem is we always need more clarity when it comes to roles and responsibilities, right? Because a lack of clarity and lack of proper expectations can make you, as the team member, feel like you're being set up for failure, or at least not fully being set up for success. So I filled this out for just a situation where people would be disagreeing on roles and responsibilities. So we've got 5 people involved in the conflict, and we've got their interests and their needs, which the majority of people would have similar needs and interests, but sometimes you have somebody that has something unique. In this case, people want to get along. They want fairness and respect, and they want to have a quality product. They also want to get recognized for their work, and they want to be able to take some time off after they've earned it. Perceptions and attitudes. What are some perceptions and attitudes surrounding the notion of a misconception about roles and responsibilities? Well, some people might be frustrated. They might feel like they're being disrespected. They might not have ownership. They might be bored. There's probably a lack of team cohesion. There might be a disregard for quality. And so you can see how filling out a fishbone diagram could help you map out conflict so that you can then address the definitions, address the expectations, get everybody's feelings out. And you can do this with your team too. So that way you can then tackle the problem. De-escalation. You got to de-escalate the situation sometimes because emotions run high. Sometimes people get into a conflict and they get heated. And so in order to de-escalate, there's some things that you kind of want to do, right? You want to offer empathy without taking ownership of the problem. You want to let people vent until they run out of steam, unless it's an emergency. There are times when we just don't have time for that because safety is a concern or security is a concern. But if you can, let them vent until they run out of steam. Clarify misunderstandings, set boundaries, use active listening techniques. And sometimes you might even need to take a break and reconvene when emotions are able to be more in check. Because everyone wants to be heard, understood, and acknowledged. And if you've ever been around the US military, you know HUA is something that the Army uses in response to an order being given. And it does stand for heard, understood, and acknowledged. And so I've always liked that. I thought that was great because that's all we ever want in communication. So make sure that you're giving them that opportunity. And sometimes de-escalating a conflict is like trying to negotiate with a toddler. You offer compromises. They throw a tantrum. You both eat a cookie and take a time out. Come back to the table when everybody's blood sugar is more stable and everybody's had a nap. I used to work in a call center for AT&T back in the day, and every phone call was a de-escalation, okay? People don't call their phone company because they're happy and they want to say good morning. No, they don't call because their phone's great and they love their bill. They call because they have an issue. My internet's not working. My bill's too high. I dropped my phone in the toilet. I've heard it all. And I had to de-escalate that call before I could even start addressing their solution. And if I didn't, then the customer didn't feel heard, understood, and acknowledged. And then it wouldn't be a good phone call. So I mentioned active listening. Active listening is something that I first learned about in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Dr. Stephen Covey. I know a lot of people are familiar with his work. And I had the pleasure of taking a class through the Franklin Covey Institute. And I learned it's best to listen first to understand, then to be understood. And the reason for that is we have to listen before I can understand you. And then once I do, now I can think of how I want to respond to you. But you can't do both at the same time. You can't listen to understand and prepare what you're going to say. So I'll give you some tips for active listening. You want to face the speaker and use proper eye contact. You don't want to interrupt. Listen attentively to their words, but also Pay attention to their body language, facial expressions, tone, and demeanor. Look for underlying themes or shared values. Listen without judgment or jumping to conclusions. Ask clarifying questions to ensure you understand. Offer advice only when asked, which is a hard one. Or simply ask, would you like to hear my opinion? Or can I give you some feedback? Paraphrase and summarize to reflect back to them. This ensures they feel heard and that you understand. And if they tell you no, they don't want your feedback, okay, come to me if and when you do. And that can be a tough one. So if you find yourself judging others in a conflict or in any other situation, try pivoting to empathy instead. Where are they coming from? What else might be going on? How would I feel if I were them? What would I do in this scenario? Now, you can do an empathy map to actually document it if you're not sure, and I'll share one in a few slides. This brings us to our second knowledge check. Which of the below is an example of a de-escalation technique? Responding to name calling with a more creative insult, offering empathy without taking ownership, coming up with a list of things they did in the past that were rude, or pretending you don't hear them when they speak. Now, some of these might get a laugh and some of these might get you fired. So choose wisely on that. It looks like most of y'all got it right. That is great. And it is B, offering empathy without taking ownership. I think we've got everybody. Yep. Good job, everybody. So another thing I wanted to talk about, which is important for goal setting, prioritizing, project management, and definitely conflict resolution. And that's the idea of aligning your interests where you can. You want to align your interest with your organization. So this might be your client's organization. It might be your job's organization. If you can, find out your mission, your vision, your goals, your objectives, your key performance indicators, and your metrics that they use to measure success by. When it comes to individual stakeholders, you want to find out those interests as well. What do they really care about? What are their priorities and goals? How do they align with their organization's mission, vision, etc.? Find out what does success look like to them, and then figure out how you can demonstrate value. This is going to showcase how aligning your interests contributes to positive outcomes for your project, for your team, for your business, etc. In order to do that, you have to get to know your stakeholders, right? You want to be able to create win-win solutions and scenarios through communicating effectively, collaboration, and compromise. Understanding the goals are very important, though, so start there. A lot of times this is right on your website. It might be something that you come up with together if it's a new company or a new team. And I like even having mission, vision, and goals for teams, for projects. And make sure that everyone is on the same page with the key performance indicators and the metrics used to be successful so that everybody knows what right looks like when we get there. How will you know that you actually achieved what you set out to achieve if you didn't paint a picture of what that looks like and then make sure that everybody knows? So we talk about analyzing your stakeholders. Tell me in the chat, are you currently performing a stakeholder analysis for your projects? If so, tell me. Yes, no, sometimes, only for Christmas. Maybe you fill out a stakeholder analysis to decide who gets a card. Now, stakeholder analysis is great for project management anyway, but it's really useful for conflict resolution. And if you're not familiar with the concept, or maybe you need a refresher, a stakeholder analysis is an essential step in conflict resolution or in project management to help identify individuals or groups that have a vested interest in the outcome. Conducting a stakeholder analysis early in the conflict resolution process is crucial. So here's the definition here. It's a process again of identifying individuals and groups that have a vested interest. You might have 50 stakeholders. I know I've worked on projects where I had sometimes hundreds because I was dealing with 30 different organizations within the Department of Defense. And then within each agency, I had departments, divisions, teams, and it was quite extensive. But we did our best to document everything because we had to negotiate some really big changes. We had to create some brand new processes as well as develop some changes to some old processes. And nobody likes to change, right? So we kind of had to finesse each person, each department, each division, and each agency differently so that we could all come together in a workshop at the end and get on the same page for the way forward. I broke this down into basically 5 steps. You want to identify your stakeholders. You want to assess that stakeholder's individual influence and level of interest. Some stakeholders don't want to be bothered much. Others, they want constant communication. You want to understand the stakeholders' needs and expectations. You want to analyze the stakeholders' relationship. And you want to develop stakeholder engagement strategies. Empathy mapping. Empathy mapping is something that I use when it comes to conflict resolution. Before I will actually meet with someone, I'll write down what I know about their situation. So we'll go through kind of an example here. And this came out of design thinking. This is something that's used in the world of software and manufacturing when teams are using it to come up with ideas to emulate the user, put their minds in the mind of the customer or the stakeholder or the person on the other end of that mouth. So in this scenario, I'm going to give you Larry. Larry is the software engineer lead on the project. We want to convince Larry to add more resources to the project so that we can compress the timeline. We want to deliver 2 months early. Have a hand being raised. Let me check. Ray, do you have your hand raised for something you need help with? If so, drop it in the chat. Might have been accidental. Okay, if anybody has any questions or anything, go ahead and put them in the chat. And I'll make sure to address them at the end. So when we're doing an empathy map, we want to get inside that person's head, right? So we already know a little bit about our coworker, Larry. He's the lead software guy for the team. He's been in the company for like 8 years. So we want to put a map together. What does Larry think or feel or want? If we came to Larry and said, hey, we want you to put more resources on this because we want to push our delivery by 2 months, what do you think is going to happen? Well, he might feel very stressed. He might think it's impossible or not worth doing. He wants to deliver on time. He doesn't want to have to work extra hours to deliver early. And yeah, sure, he wants to impress his leadership and satisfy clients, but not at the cost of his sanity. What are some things that Larry might hear when it comes to the project? You know, if he talks to coworkers, what might he hear from his team members? They might say, hey, we're doing the best we can, boss. We're maxed out on resources. We've got too much going on. We can't work any faster. What might he see? He might see obstacles in his way that would prevent him from accelerating the timeline. He might see piles of work that still need done. He might see paperwork stacking up that needs to be addressed. He might see lack of resources. He might even see priorities falling off that need attention as well. What might he say or do? Well, he might complain. He might complain to you, his coworkers, his wife. He might become stubborn and refuse to discuss moving up the timeline. He might say, you know what, this job ain't worth it. I'm going to look for something different. Depending on how bad the situation is, right? And Larry's stress level and where he's at in his career. I add a couple more to the design thinking because I read these other things in another empathy map, and I think they're very useful. What might Larry stand to gain from this? Well, he might get a promotion out of it. And we know he wants to. He wants to take over the department when Roger retires. What might he fear, or what pain is he going to try to avoid? Well, he doesn't want the stress, right? His team's already overworked. They need time off. He hasn't had a vacation forever. Depending on what he's got going on in his personal life, it might be just too much. So think through what somebody might think, feel, want, what they might hear or see or even say or do when it comes to the conflict. And then think about, what do they stand to gain from this accelerated timeline? Well, they stand to gain favor. Maybe they'll get a bonus. Maybe they'll get a raise. Maybe they'll get time off at the end of it. Sometimes they give you free time off. But just, think through these things and jot them down. Now I want to talk about the art of persuasion. We always want to persuade somebody of something, right? Persuade your kids to go to bed, persuade your husband to cut the grass without you complaining 3 times, persuade your team to get along and do their jobs without too much intervention. Sometimes we want to persuade a stakeholder or a client of a decision. And so we want to make sure that we set ourselves up for success when we go to persuade them. You want to understand your audience. You always want to tailor your message to your audience if you can. You want to resonate with their values, their interests, and their perspective. You want to appeal to their emotions. Use storytelling, anecdotes, and vivid language to evoke emotions and connect with them on a deeper level. Back everything up with evidence. You want to make sure this is logical. So support your arguments with credible data, facts, logical reasoning. This is going to build credibility and persuade even the most skeptical people. Anticipate objections and then address them. If you can anticipate all of the objections that you might get from someone, and then you already have a response prepared, you'd be amazed at how quickly you can get them to agree with you. And then you want to leave them with a compelling call to action. Make sure it's clear. This is what I need from you. This is when I need it by. This is why it's important. So Aristotle, another one of those ancient Greek philosophers that I admire, he wrote about the art of rhetoric. Rhetoric is speaking, debating, and persuading. And so he made it clear it requires all 3, logos, pathos, and ethos, which is logic, emotion, and credibility. So all 3 of those must be present if you want to persuade effectively. Has anybody heard of the concept expand the pie? This is a concept in the world of negotiations. Tell me in the chat if you've heard of this. Okay, a few people, it's new to them. Okay, wonderful. Well, let me tell you about it. Expanding the pie, is this a cooking class? No. But if we were negotiating over pie, let's say we're going to cut this into 4 slices. Which slice, from which pie would you want? Now, I would need the pie on the right because the pie on the left looks like I'm going to need 10 of them to even get a taste. But the pie on the right is a lot bigger. So expanding the pie is the notion that you focus on interests and not positions. Instead of sticking specifically to demands or positions, try to gain underlying interests and sweeten the pot, if you will. Find other ways that you can do trade-offs. Maybe there are some uncovered agendas or needs or wants or desires that you can include in your pie. You want to seek win-win solutions that are mutually beneficial. You want to aim for outcomes where both parties benefit. We don't want a zero-sum game. It's not you win and I lose or vice versa. It's we both win. You want to generate options. You want to brainstorm and explore as many options as you can and come up with alternatives. And then you want to understand what's called BATNA, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What that means is that's what you're going to do if we can't solve this problem. What is going to happen? What decision will you make or will I make if we cannot resolve this? And then you use that as leverage. And you do want to make sure that you're focusing on long term relationships. Be creative, be flexible, but maintain persistence because true change takes time. And if it's a deep rooted issue, it's going to have to take some time. And you can find more about this concept. This came out of a book. The book is called Expand the Pie: How to Create More Value in Any Negotiation. And that is by Loom, Tyler Wood, and Wayne St. John. And it was published in 2002. You can find it on Amazon if you're interested. So I'm going to go over just some example scenarios here. Let's say if you have any particular issues that you want to discuss, if there's one that resonates with you, drop it in the chat and I'll take a look at that. So I'll just go over a couple here. So task delegation disputes. These come up when there's a difference of opinion about who should be doing what. Maybe one of your team members is like, I don't like the way the work is aligned. So can we talk about that? They might be frustrated and tense. So you're going to want to schedule a one-on-one team meeting with that person. Discuss their concerns, clarify your tasks and why those assignments were handed to them, and recognize their contributions. Explore opportunities for flexibility in task assignments and empower input on their preferred roles and responsibilities. Communication breakdowns. Communication breakdowns happen when people just aren't on the same page. Maybe people are being left out of meetings. Some people are being left off of emails. They're missing crucial updates. It might even be a situation where one group is refusing to talk to the other group, and that can be very challenging. Communication is what keeps things flowing, right? So to address that, you're going to want to schedule a team meeting to address that miscommunication and then provide clarification. Clarify your project requirements, your team expectations, and if you can, come up with some team rules and guidelines. You know, this is something I would recommend that you do early in the team if you can, but it's a really good idea to just get everybody on the same page. Maybe it's a decision-making dilemma where the team just can't agree on what to do next, and so they're stuck. Well, bring everybody together, have open dialogue, and do a brainstorming session to generate other solutions. And then facilitate a process to build consensus. Because if everybody's voice gets a chance to be heard and they get to participate in a democratic process, even if it doesn't go their way, they will at least feel like they did get their point across and they did the best they could. And you always want to make sure that roles and responsibilities in the decision-making process are clear. Who can make those decisions? And at what points are those being made? I'll give you one more. Client expectations. Sometimes they are not in alignment. Maybe we turned something in and the client was like, what is this? This is not what I expected. You're going to want to schedule a meeting with them to discuss it. Get their clear expectations and align those with the project scope, objectives, and constraints. Sometimes they're out of whack and you have to evolve things. Maybe you might even have to do an amendment or modification to your agreement with that client. Establish a communication plan to keep them informed going forward about the project progress and milestones. And make sure you're emphasizing the importance of collaboration and transparency in ensuring a successful outcome that meets everyone's needs. See, the key here is we want everybody to have their needs met. We want to have clear and open communication, and we want to collaborate. That's the common thing when it comes to resolving conflict. You work together, you share your voice, and then you come up with a solution that everybody can buy into and live with in the long run. So that brings us to our third and final knowledge check. Which of the below is a step in stakeholder analysis? Is it A, ask the stakeholder what their favorite project was to work on? B, analyze the stakeholder's past work? C, ask personal questions to find out what their likes and dislikes are? Or D, develop stakeholder engagement strategies? Don't see that poll coming up. Can y'all see that poll? Oh no. Oh, there it is. Thank you. All right. So put that in the chat or put it in the poll when you think you know the right answer there. Almost everybody in here. Okay, I think we've got everyone. And the answer is D, develop stakeholder engagement strategies. Their favorite project, yeah, that's interesting information, but that's not necessarily going to give you a lot of information to resolve a conflict. Looking at their past work is useful, but it may not be relevant. Asking them personal questions to find out what they like and dislike might be part of your stakeholder analysis as you're building trust and rapport, but really D is what we are looking for there. Okay. So now we are coming to the end, and I want to leave you with some common pitfalls to avoid as you're resolving conflict. You want to make sure you don't want to ignore it. Ignoring the conflict, it's going to fester, it's going to mutate, it's going to become a monster, way scarier than it ever had to be. You don't want to take sides. We are on the same side, the side of solving the problem, resolving the conflict, addressing the client's needs. Listen to respond. Use some of those active listening techniques I shared and make sure that you're paying attention. If you find yourself preparing on what you're going to say next, catch yourself because you're not listening. You're not listening to understand if that's the thing. Don't rush to judgment. Rushing to judgment can cause pain, problems, and waste everybody's time. Make sure you're addressing your inherent biases and you don't let them completely derail your project or your conflicts. Keep them in check. Make sure you're addressing the root causes, not the symptoms. You're not going to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, right? Make sure you involve the stakeholders. Do it early, do it often. They'll be satisfied, and you probably will even get some help from them on solving the issue. Make sure you've got good communication channels open. Make sure you've got accountability. If somebody says they're going to do something, follow through with them. If you say you're going to do something, follow through. Accountability is huge for getting things done and building trust. And make sure that you follow up. Follow up is so important because sometimes, conflict is addressed over and over again, and you have to touch base regularly to put it to bed. And so I'll leave you with 5 key takeaways here. Conflicts are unavoidable. They can arise over tasks, personalities, roles, or resources. Collaboration is the key to resolving conflict effectively and permanently. Logos, pathos, and ethos are all needed to effectively persuade other people. And you will resolve more conflicts if you lead with curiosity and diplomacy. So don't fight over a slice, expand the pie. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I will take questions.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I think you really gave us some key tactics to help resolve conflicts.
Yeah.
So we certainly really appreciate your help. I recently had a communication breakdown in my role. And when we had that follow-up meeting, the communication was going out in a very timely manner, but there was confusion on what to do with that information. And so having that meeting was so helpful.
Yeah.
And Absolutely. I also loved the quote, build a bridge and not a wall. We deal with a lot of silos. And so I love that quote. I'm going to take that back.
Yeah.
Yes. A reminder to our audience members, if you have Q&A for Tammara, please put it in the Q&A box and we will make sure to address those questions. So Tracy, do you want to walk us through the Q&As?
Absolutely. And I agree. I like the building a bridge and not a wall. You have to knock the walls down. But I don't know about you. I want some pie right now too, but we'll talk about that closer to lunch. Thanks, yeah.
Pie has been on my mind. I've been on a blackberry pie kick.
Well, hey, that may be for lunch. So there's a few questions in. We'll go ahead and get started with those. How can you work with someone that is unwilling to listen and goes directly to management?
Mm-hmm. That happens. Sometimes we got tattletale Tamaras and they'll just run right to the boss, right? So I think it's a good idea in that situation, have a conversation with management, explain this is what I'd like to do, get their buy-in, get their backup, and then set up a meeting where people can share their ideas. And maybe you want to invite management to that meeting. At one organization I worked at with the Army, we would have coffee calls every Friday where management would sit in with our team meetings. We would share coffee, somebody would bring snacks, and we would hash out our problems and we would level set expectations because you want to make sure that you're following the proper communication channels. You don't want to inundate leadership all the time with your problems if you don't have to. So you do want to make sure that you are, setting the proper expectations about how to address that conflict from the get-go.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, another question. Have you used conflict resolution techniques when dealing with hecklers while doing stand-up and agile projects?
You got to deal with hecklers by just addressing them head on and shut them down as quickly as you can. Yeah, hecklers can derail you. That's the thing. You want to make sure everybody has a voice. Everybody has the opportunity to share their opinion and perspective, but there's a right time and a place for it. And during a live comedy show, it's not the right time, but maybe after, right? So maybe you have a specific meeting with your team to share best practices and expectations. And I highly recommend if you can get them to come up with it, if you can set that expectation with the team together, you're going to have more likely that people will follow them and trust them and, share them with others and encourage others to follow them as well.
Very good. Thank you. And how do you deal with coworker with higher titles that works from ego and frequently has coworkers doing needless time-consuming work?
That is a tough one because the ego really just likes to get in there and be a pain in the butt. I know. Let's see. In that situation, if you're dealing with a coworker that has a higher title, you might have to humble yourself a little bit. You might need to go to them and explain, this is what these people are talented at. This is where they can get the biggest bang for their buck. So you're going to want to do an empathy map. I would say find out all you can about that person and figure out what do they really care about. I've worked with one boss. He was very egotistical. All he cared about was looking good and growing his empire, which means adding bodies to our department. Once I figured out that's all he cared about was looking good, and I was able to take that back to the team, we did everything we could to kind of set him up to get feathers in his cap because that's what drove him. And once we started getting wins for him and we started looking like a success to him, he eased off quite a bit. So I'm going to guess that if somebody's being driven by their ego there and they're constantly having people do mundane tasks, they might be out of touch with what's truly important, and they might be lacking trust. So just building on some successes, transparent communication, and then figuring out what motivates them so you can try to get ahead of that, I think is your best bet.
Very good. Thank you. Sorry, there's some tough ones coming in, Tammara. Sorry, I'll go ahead and apologize, but there's some good ones in here. So if customer is the internal team, but still sees my team as them on the opposite side of the table, any quick tips to break down that conflict when it's internal and long-term relationships?
So your customer is an internal team. So somebody's still within the realm of your company, but they still see your team as a them on the opposite side. Okay, that is definitely problematic. I would highly encourage an empathy map first. Just go ahead and write down everything you know. Try to get to know that person. Who has the most rapport with that person that maybe can then lead that discussion, because you want to get at the root of their issue. You know, again, if they are seeing it as us versus them, they're being protective. There's a lack of trust. Maybe there's some, maybe there's a history there. They got burned before, or maybe they have a reason to be paranoid. Maybe there were problems in a previous conflict. So you want to dig, find out the history, and then find out what really motivates them. What do you truly care about? And then come up with some boundaries. You want to do everything you can to shift from us versus them to us versus the problem. And you want to be transparent about why that is. Look, we're wasting our time here if we're just going to pit one another against one another. Because when it comes to competing between you and I, if you want to be the winner, that means you want me to be the loser. And I thought we worked for the same company, for the same project, for the same goals and mission. So sometimes that means you might even have to bring in a third party. Sometimes people just won't work with you and they won't listen to you, but they might with somebody else. So sometimes you might have to bring in HR, get a mediator, get somebody that they trust that is neutral that can then help navigate that, because you can't change anybody. You can't force them to do anything. All you can do is offer solutions, set the stage, and do your best to build a bridge. But if they don't cross that bridge, then that's kind of on them. And you're going to need to be creative and look to other leaders to help you.
Very good. Thank you. And one of the poll questions, there was an answer that had the words "not taking ownership." Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, not taking ownership. Let me see if I can go back. I guess that'd probably be a while back, huh? So you want to make sure. Here we go. Offer empathy without taking ownership. So when I worked in a call center, every time I dealt with somebody calling, it was an escalation. These people were upset, right? So no matter what it is, they would call me. I'm upset. My bill's high. Blah, 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 blah. My phone's not working. I want to cancel my service. So you can empathize with them without saying you're going to solve the issue, although that is your goal, right? So I'm so sorry to hear that, sir, ma'am. I could imagine how frustrating that would be. Yeah, that would suck. Yeah, that would be terrible. That would be stressful. Wow, you've really been going through it, haven't you? Let me see what I can do to help you. Or maybe we can work together to come up with a solution. So you're offering to help, but you're not taking ownership. I had people call and tell me they're literally cussing me out because they dropped their phone in the toilet or because their kid ran up their phone bill. Well, I don't have any control over that. So all I can do is I can say, yeah, that's really frustrating. I can see why you would feel that way. Let me take a look and see if there's anything we can do. You're not promising, but you are at least going to offer that empathy so you want to make sure they feel heard, understood, and acknowledged.
Good. So we have a real case question here, and I have dealt with this myself. So how do you face conflict resolution with someone who strongly feels that everything will go right if others will just do what they say, and they're convinced that yelling makes for good results as the normal MO?
Yeah, that happens. Sometimes we run into people like that. You definitely don't want to yell back because all you're going to do is escalate the situation. So if somebody is yelling at you in the workplace, I think the first thing you want to do is establish a boundary. Hey, maybe we need to take a break and cool off because it seems like you're upset and I don't appreciate being yelled at. We need to be professional and respectful here. So that's the first thing. Set a proper boundary. If they won't, then that's a problem because there comes a point where you do want to involve management or HR because we all have guidelines at work, right? We're expected to be professional. We're expected to let other people voice their opinions, and nobody wants to work for a dictator. So if somebody is saying, if you just do it my way, it would be great. Okay. Humble yourself a little bit because that's that person's ego talking, and recognize that. But also try to understand, why is it that you feel so strongly about this particular way. Try to get inside their head a little bit. Definitely do an empathy map so you can try to figure out, what are they motivated by? They probably have that competing mode of conflict, right? So you're going to need to be creative, and you're going to probably want to throw every tool at them. So do an empathy map, do some research on your stakeholder analysis, find out everything you can, appeal to their sense of morals and values. And you got to know what that is to be able to appeal to it. Is it fairness? Is it efficiency? Is it productivity? For them, that might be the case. And so you're going to want to do your best to have open and honest communication with them. If they refuse to budge, if they refuse to talk to you or listen, you might want to bring in a third party that can help mediate. Sometimes mediation is the only way. I know that's not a...
We have time for one more. Someone asking, can we see the slide for pitfalls to avoid one more time? Can you go back and cover those quickly?
Yep. So pitfalls to avoid, you want to address things. You don't want to ignore them, because if you ignore a conflict, most of the time they fester and they get worse. You don't want to take sides. If you're the project manager and you're mediating something between a client and a team member, you don't want to take sides. You want to take the side of getting everybody on the same page, of solving everybody's problems, because the client is just as important as the team member, right? There's no hierarchical ranking order of who's more important here, at least in my mind. You want to listen to understand and not just to respond. And you don't want to rush to judgment. You don't want to let your biases get in the way of your decision making, whether it be your stereotypes, your preconceived notions based on what you've been through in the past. Yeah, every scenario is different and should be treated as such. Make sure you get to the root cause of the issue, because when you dig into conflict, you might find there's a lot of different things going on behind the scenes and historically that led us to here. And maybe the issue is completely different than what you initially thought it was. And you want to make sure you involve all of your stakeholders early and often, the ones that do show an interest and have an impact on the process, at least. And you want to make sure you're communicating, because all of this comes down to communication and collaboration. And jumping back to your person that you work with that just thinks it's my way or the highway, and if you would just do what I say, that's not good communication. That's not involving everyone. That's really not playing fair. So I encourage you to do a map, see what you can do, find out all of the information from your stakeholder analysis, and then come up with a custom approach using your ethos, pathos, and logos, right? You've got to have logic, credibility, and you want to appeal to their emotion. Make sure that you hold people accountable. If they say they're going to do something, do it, and that includes you. And make sure that you follow up as needed. You might need to check in periodically to make sure things are still working okay, that the conflict is still resolved, that there haven't been some other conflicts that came up.
Very good. Thank you. This has been very, very good. I've got lots of takeaways from this that's going to help me, and I think everybody else has. And Amanda, I think that takes us to a quick break. What do you think?
Yes, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. That was definitely actionable and certainly relatable. I think we can all relate to conflict in the workplace. So let's take a 10-minute break.